The fog is lifting. Clarity is calling you forward. Welcome to Forward in Freedom. I'm Tanya Johnson. This is where awareness becomes power. Let's move forward in freedom. Have you ever had a question, one that just wouldn't leave you alone? Not because someone else asked it, but because it quietly kept finding you. I've had questions like that. Some stayed with me for a few days, others stayed much longer. One question in particular seemed to show up wherever I went. It wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding, but it was persistent. Why does the same thing keep happening? The words were simple. It wasn't about one difficult day or one difficult conversation. It was recognizing the same feeling showing up in different places, the same disappointment, the same frustration, the same hope that maybe this time things will finally be different. Looking back now, I don't think that question was asking me to find an answer. It was inviting me to begin paying attention. And I wonder if you've ever had a question like that. Maybe yours sound completely different. Why am I always so tired? Why do I keep ending up here? Why do I always feel responsible for everyone else? When did I stop feeling like myself? Different questions, different circumstances, yet perhaps the same invitation. Not an invitation to solve everything today, just an invitation to notice. I've discovered that some of the most meaningful changes in our lives don't just begin with answers. They begin the moment we notice what we stopped noticing. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. How does it happen? How do thoughtful people, caring people, hardworking people slowly stop noticing what's happening in their own lives? I don't think it happens all at once. It happens quietly. One disappointment, one compromise, one difficult conversation. One more week of saying things will settle down soon. Then another week passes, then another month, then another season. Until one day, what once felt temporary begins to feel normal. And we hardly notice the change. Have you ever caught yourself saying, I guess this is just the way life is? Not because you truly believed it, perhaps you were simply tired. Or you've been carrying something for so long, you stopped asking whether you were ever meant to carry it in the first place. That's what familiarity does. It doesn't always change our circumstances. It quietly changes what we accept as normal. And what becomes normal usually stops getting our attention, not because it's healthy, simply because it's familiar. How many things have we accepted that we were only meant to endure for a season? Not because we chose them, but because little by little, we adapted. One of the things that I've come to appreciate about people is how adaptable we are. In many ways, that's one of our greatest strengths. We adapt. We adapt to long work days. We adapt to difficult seasons. We adapt to disappointment. We adapt to criticism. We adapt to caring far more than we ever imagined. Adaptation helps us survive, and surviving difficult seasons matters. But here's what I remember thinking. What if we become so good at adapting that we've forgotten to ask whether this is what we were ever meant to adapt to? That question stopped me, not because I had an answer, because I wasn't sure that I'd ever asked myself that before. There's wisdom in adapting to a difficult season. Life often requires it. But there's also a quiet danger when we unpack our bags in a place we were only supposed to pass through. I've thought about that same sentence many times. How many of us are living in places we never intended to stay? Not physical places, emotional places. Places like constant worry, constant exhaustion, constant fear, constant self-doubt. Places that once felt temporary until they slowly became familiar. And here's what life has taught me. Just because we've adapted to something doesn't mean we were created to live there. And before we move on, I'd like you to sit with this one question. Not to answer it today, just to carry it with you. Is this where I want to keep living? There was a season in my life when I would pull into my driveway after a long day. I would turn off the car and I would just sit there. The house was only a few steps away, and everything I needed to do was waiting inside. But I wasn't ready to go in. Not yet. I needed a few quiet moments where no one needed anything from me. Looking back, I think I was beginning to notice. I didn't have the words for it then. I couldn't explain it. I just knew something inside me was beginning to ask different questions. And maybe you've had moments like that. Maybe yours wasn't in a driveway. Maybe it was sitting in a parking lot before work. Maybe it was taking the long way home. Maybe it was waking up before everyone else because those few quiet moments felt like the only time you could hear yourself think. The place really isn't what's important. The quiet is. Quiet has a way of introducing us to ourselves. Not the version everyone else knows, the version that we've been too busy to listen to. And perhaps that's why we fill so much of our lives with noise. We reach for our phones, we turn on the television, we find one more thing to do. Not because those things are wrong, but because silence has a gentle way of revealing what busyness allows us to postpone. Awareness rarely arrives with a loud announcement. More often, it quietly taps us on the shoulder. The question is, will we make room to listen? As I look back now, I realize something was changing inside me. Not all at once, slowly. Those quiet moments weren't giving me answers, they were changing the kinds of questions that I was asking. That's one of the greatest gifts of reflection. Reflection doesn't always answer our questions. Sometimes it gives us better ones. Without realizing it, one day I noticed that I wasn't asking, why is this happening? Instead, I found myself asking, what am I not seeing? That may not sound like a big difference. For me, it changed everything. One question kept my attention on what was happening around me. The other invited me to notice what was happening within me. That didn't excuse anyone else's choices. It simply reminded me that the only life that I could truly change was my own. And that realization brought something unexpected. Not shame, not blame, hope. Because once we began to see ourselves more clearly, we also began to recognize that growth is possible. For a long time, I thought replaying something over and over in my mind meant that I was reflecting. Now I know there's a difference. Replay keeps us emotionally tied to yesterday. Reflection helps us understand it. Replay sounds like this. Why did I say that? I should have handled that differently. If only I had. Have you noticed something about those questions? They're all looking backward. And there's nothing wrong with looking back unless we build our home there. Reflection asks something different. What am I learning about myself? What pattern am I beginning to notice? What is this experience inviting me to see? Those questions don't erase the past, they redeem it. Every experience has something to teach us if we're willing to learn. Replay keeps us emotionally tied to yesterday. Reflection prepares us for tomorrow. It can't rewrite yesterday, but it can change the person who walks into tomorrow. And perhaps that's one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves. Not another chance to relive the past, another opportunity to grow because of it. As I think about everything that we've talked about today, there's one thought I keep coming back to. The pattern isn't always the problem. The pattern may be the invitation. Not an invitation to blame ourselves, an invitation to carry, not an invitation to carry guilt, an invitation to become more aware, to slow down long enough to notice what we've been unable to see while life was moving so quickly. I've learned that life has a way of getting our attention, sometimes through joy, other times through disappointment, through unexpected change, or through questions that quietly refuse to leave us alone. The invitation isn't found in what happened. The invitation is found in what we're willing to notice because it happened. As I look back over my own journey, I've realized that the questions I've avoided the longest were often the very questions that helped me grow the most. Not because they immediately changed my circumstances, They didn't. They changed the way I saw them. And once I began seeing differently, I found myself living differently. As we come to an end of our conversation, I'd like to leave you with one question. Not one you need to answer today, just one to carry with you this week. What have you stopped noticing simply because it has become familiar? Maybe it's a habit. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's the way you've been speaking to yourself. Maybe it's a burden you've carried for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to set it down. Don't rush to answer, just notice. Notice what comes to mind while you're driving, while you're making coffee, while you're taking a walk. Pay attention to those quiet moments when a thought gently returns. I've learned not to dismiss those moments too quickly. They've often become the beginning of something important. Every meaningful journey begins somewhere. For many of us, it begins with seeing one small thing a little differently than we did yesterday. And before we end our time together, may I leave you with a blessing. May you have the courage to notice what you've been too busy to see. May you give yourself grace as new awareness begins to unfold. May curiosity become stronger than criticism. May clarity replace confusion. May hope quietly rise where disappointment has taken root. May peace find its way into the places that have carried worry far too long. May you discover that freedom doesn't always begin when life changes around you. It often begins when something changes within you. And may you continue moving forward one step at a time with clarity, with hope, with peace. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for spending these moments with me. If today's conversation gave you something to reflect on, I hope that you'll carry it into the week ahead. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, perhaps they'll appreciate the invitation to reflect as well. Until next time, the fog is lifting. Clarity is calling you forward. This is where awareness becomes power. Let's move forward in freedom. I'm Tanya J.